Now, because of all the publicity surrounding this little incident with the blue and white hair, a lot of people think that perhaps maybe overnight I have been transformed into a Maple Leaf fan. Well, I certainly feel sorry for the Maple Leaf fans who have been suffering now for so many years.
After 30 years and a long summer, I've made the difficult decision to step aside from broadcasting hockey. I look at the last couple of years, there's guys that play in the league now that I was covering the games when their fathers played in the league. And some of those guys, like a Steve Thomas, for example, went on and played 15 or 20 years in the National Hockey League and have long been retired. And here I am still doing the games, so it makes me feel a little bit old. But it's just a matter, really, I think, of changing priorities. My wife, Jackie, and I, we have a son, Charlie, just started junior kindergarten this year, and I look at how quickly the last 4 years have gone. It's pretty amazing. He likes to get the plastic mini sticks out and play hockey with Dad in the basement, and I think that window of time with someone who's growing up so quickly is pretty small, and you want to be there for as much a part of it as you can. So on Friday nights, I think I'd rather play hockey in the basement with Charlie than broadcast hockey, and ultimately, if I'm going to spend time in hockey rinks, I want it to be with him.
Welcome to the Kingston Memorial Center, game number 2 of this OHL playoff series between the Oshawa Generals and the Kingston Frontenacs. Tim, I think quite clearly the Frontenacs don't want to go down 2-0.
No, when you look back over 30 years, I guess covering most junior teams, you'd hope to have maybe a championship season or two to reflect on, or maybe a couple long playoff runs. And unfortunately, we didn't have that. You know, I go back to the early 80s. I mean, some of the things I remember, you know, covering Doug Gilmour when he was still playing. He had a 55-game point scoring streak with the Cornwall Royals. I remember interviewing Kirk Muller when he first came up from the Kingston Voyageurs as a 15-year-old. But I think the big thing for me, if I had to highlight one thing, would be the closing of the Memorial Center. Because of the fact that I grew up in Kingston, I played as a kid on the Memorial Center ice, and a lot of championships had been won there in the 1950s and 60s. And I love the new K-Rock Center. It's a state-of-the-art facility, but the reality is that the Memorial Center had so much character and so much memories. And you know, when the Memorial Center was full and the place was rocking, it was a great, great place. And I still believe, of all the broadcasts that we did on TVCOGECO, that our final broadcast at the Memorial Center was a fitting tribute to that building. It was a great broadcast. The Frontenacs actually beat London that night, which they should not have, but they closed it out in a great, great fashion. When I was a kid growing up in Portsmouth, I used to fall asleep at night with a transistor radio in bed, listening to Max Jackson call a Kingston Aces game, or later on a Kingston Canadiens game. And I used to think about, wow, would it ever be cool to be able to broadcast a hockey game? And little did I know, by the time I was 20 years old, I was working alongside Max Jackson at CKWS doing TV sports. Ultimately, Max retired, and I was entrusted with the chair to replace Max Jackson, and nobody could replace Max. I used to tell him that I was just keeping the chair warm for him. But Max is in the Hall of Fame. He had a 23-year broadcasting career, and now I look at the fact that I broadcast hockey for 30 years, longer than Max did. And to me, that's somewhat overwhelming to think about that I could ever have a career that was longer than the career that Max had. And I don't think I'll ever have the impact personally that Max had on the sporting community. But, you know, as a kid in Portsmouth who wanted to maybe one day broadcast one hockey game, to get the chance to broadcast many hundred hockey games, I really feel truly blessed that I was able to do that.
I have no real brash bets about tonight's hockey game, but I do have a favorite, and this Leaf sweater is getting just a little bit hot. So I think I'll dispose of that.
In my early 20s, when I was broadcasting at CKWS, I had lunch one day with the legendary Dick Beddoes, who was a longtime sports writer, primarily with the Globe and Mail, but later in his career wound up doing TV in Hamilton. And one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given was just be yourself. Just, you know, be who you are off the camera, on the camera, and say what you really, truly feel. And I'm surprised probably over 30 years that never got me fired, because most people probably would have thought that somewhere along the way it would have. But I think at the end of the day, you connect with the viewers and people realize that you're open, you're honest in what you're saying. It doesn't always play well with the hometown hockey team, but I think at the end of the day, it brings you credibility. And when you meet somebody away from the rink, you're not saying something entirely different than what you were saying on the air during the broadcast. And I've always kind of tried to bring those two together. But I've also realized that you get some darts thrown at you when you do that too, right? And it hasn't come without, you know, I've got a big bullseye on my back, and certainly there's people that don't like your opinions or don't agree with your opinions, but at the end of the day, to me it's important to have an opinion, and I always felt my role there was to report on what I saw, give my analysis, and you know, if some people don't like it, I think at least they respect the fact that I believe I have a credible opinion, and it's at least worth considering, and I've factored in a lot of things into the opinions and comments that I have provided.